So this PowerPoint is going to go over basics for APA citations for both in-text and your references list. And these are rules that are pretty standard for any citation you're creating with APA. So in-text citations, APA uses what's called parenthetical citation. So if you are taking a quote or paraphrasing and summarizing information and you need to give credit back to the original source, you're using parentheses to give you the author, date, and page numbers. So citations for direct quotes, this is where you're taking word for word quotations from whatever source you're looking at. You're putting them in quotation marks. In-text citations for direct quotes have to include three things. They have to have the author, the year, and the page numbers that the quotation came from. If it's all on one page, you just need one page numbers. If it's crossing multiple pages, you give that page range. So some examples of this one, according to Jones, 1998, students often had difficulty using APA style, especially when it was the first time, parentheses, page 199. So this is a pretty standard way of listing a quotation that most of the time you're giving the name of the author of who it is you're quoting in the actual sentence, that you're saying Jones said this. So if you're doing that you're giving the name in the lead of the sentence, so according to Jones, you wouldn't need to put Jones also in the parentheses. Another thing to note is that you're seeing is breaking up this parenthetical quotations here. You're getting this 1998. So the date and the author always go together. Date and author are tied together. You will never see them separated in anything with APA. Author, date, they piece together, never get separated. So you're breaking up this parenthetical quotation, and this is very common, that you're getting the author and the date at the beginning of the sentence, but you're getting the page number after you give the info. So page numbers is always going to come at the end, that it's going to follow the quote or the piece of information you're giving. So similar example, Jones 1998 found students often have difficulty using APA style. You put it at the end of the quotation, not necessarily the sentence, because the second half of it, what implications does this have for teachers, isn't coming from Jones. That's something that the author of the paper who's writing this research paper is writing. So if the author's name is in the signal phrase, it has to be followed by the date. They're always next to each other. This is typically how you're getting it, but lots of times you don't want to repeat the author's names over and over, so it is acceptable to use pronouns he, she, they, etc. in a research paper. And so the third example, she stated students often had difficulty using APA style. You're getting the author, date, and page number completely in one set of parentheses after the information. So citations follow the information. If you're getting the name in that signal phrase, you put the date with it. If you're using a pronoun as part of the signal phrase, you're putting the actual author. You still have to put the author name in that parenthetical citation. Citations for paraphrasing. So paraphrasing, we are going to talk about that a little bit in this class, is when you're taking information and putting it in your own words. So you're taking the knowledge and rephrasing it most of the time to make it fit within your research paper, to make it clear to your readers, maybe to give explanation of the information you're giving. When you're paraphrasing, it does not always require a page number, but it is suggested. I recommend it. If you can provide that information, go ahead and do so. APA doesn't require it for paraphrasing. Page numbers are always required for direct quotes, though. How do you list authors' names? And so this is some of that info that students don't always look at, that they look at how do I cite a book or an article, and they don't quite look at the author's name. It's part of that intro section that we talked about in the last video a little bit. So listing authors' names are important because of when you get into academic research, particularly in journal articles, if you're in any sort of social science or STEM fields, most of the time articles are not written by one person, but groups of people, and those groups of people can sometimes be very large. So for in-text citations, though, you're listing the author's last name in either the signal phrase, so according to Jones is the signal phrase for that sentence, or within the parenthetical citation. You don't use the author's first name unless you have multiple citations by the same author. So we had multiple Jones. We had a Laura Jones and a Sam Jones. You would have to differentiate which person is which, so which resource are you looking at? So then you would start using the first initials to go with it. But typically you don't refer to authors by their first names when you're writing academic papers. But if you do have that, you then use the first initial and the last name to refer to the authors. So for example, this Johnson, K. APA does not use complete first names anywhere. They always use first initials. If the person is listing a middle name or middle initials, you need to include those as well. This makes it gender neutral. We don't know if this K is for Catherine or Keith. And so you don't have any sort of gender discrimination within the citation that could be implicit within the reader. So it makes it very gender neutral of who the information is coming from. How do you list two authors? So what do you do if you have more than one author? If you have two authors, you name both authors in the signal phrase or citation every time you reference the work. And you use the word "and" between the author's names. But in the actual citation, so in the reference at the end of your paper, you're going to use the ampersand. So when you're actually writing the paper, you write out the word "and," but when you get to the citation at the end of the paper, you're going to use that ampersand. And that is something unique to APA. So Coleman and Johnson, 1994 supports. Reference citation would be Coleman and Johnson, 1994. So, and an ampersand do have specific roles within APA. All right, so 3 to 5 authors, you list for in-text citations only. This is what we're talking about with this video. You list all the authors in the signal phrase or parentheses the first time you cite the source. So the first time you're listing this, we're saying Morrison, Ross, Kemp, and Coleman, whatever. When you're doing it in the text, you use "and" between the author's name and the text, and use ampersand in the citation. In the following citation, so if you're citing this Morrison, Ross, Kemp, and Kalman more than once, so you're pulling more than one piece of information from that article or book, you list all the names the first time you do that, but then any following citations where you're referencing them again, you're then going to use this phrase "et al." So ET space AL. You're going to list the first author's name and then "et al., and then you give the date and the page numbers that you're pulling from. So "et al." is a Latin phrase for "and others." Most of modern academia goes back to medieval universities in Europe, specifically Oxford and Cambridge, which were founded in about the 11th century when the world still spoke Latin. And so this kind of harkens back to that tradition. So it's meaning Morrison and others. And so it is a shorthand phrase for that. The ET is not followed by a period. So it's just ET space AL. It's not an abbreviation. It is a Latin word that means "and others." So first time you list it, you got to list all 3 to 5 authors. Anything after that, you're going to give the first one "and et al." All right, how do you use 6 or more authors? So if you're using 6 or more authors in text only, you always give the first author's name followed by "et al." in the signal phrase and the citation itself, or the parenthetical citation. This is in text only. So Adams et al. 2011 examine, Adams et al. 2011, page 205. So if you got more than 6 people, you don't need to list all 17 names. You give the first one "et al." Okay, and that